Hey guys, welcome back. So today, going down the rabbit hole, we are talking about whose child is it really? We're talking about how the state assumes legal authority over your child through the birth registration, Parens Patriae, and jurisdictional contracts. So you got to think about it this way. You carried this baby, you birthed this baby, and you named this baby. But the moment you signed that certificate, they stopped being yours. So really, they told you that the birth certificate was just a record and, just that they're recording that the event happened. But the birth certificate, it's not just this little keepsake that you stuff in a drawer. It's a legal instrument, and there is a difference between recording and registering. But of course, they don't talk to you about how there's differences. So in legal terms, to register something, it isn't just to record it, it's to formally transfer original title to an official ledger. So think about what happens when you register your car, okay? You may have bought it, but once it's registered to the state, it's now listed in their records and it's subject to their rules. So anytime we register something, we're handing over the legal title. So just as I said, our cars, but also our marriages and also our children, we're quite literally saying, "Hey, I can't handle this. I'm going to hand this over to the state to handle the title of my child. We're handing it over." So birth registration works the same way that 42 USC section 242K creates federal vital statistics cooperative program. So the hospital essentially they create a record of live birth, which is a medical record, and then the state then issues the certificate, which is a financial and legal document. So the parents at that point, they receive a certified copy of the birth certificate. It's not the original. You never get the original. That original becomes property of the state, and now it's an asset that the state holds. So I want to share with you guys the American Bar Association website on birth certificates here. See if I can share my screen. So I like to go, like I said, right to the source. So here we're going to, yeah, the American Bar Association, which kind of fun little rabbit hole to go into that the bar is the British Accreditation Registry, and that's why there is an American branch to it. So, yeah, that's why we go to the americanbar.org and search birth certificates. We're going to read a little bit here. So it says, maybe yours is tucked away in a box or filed for safekeeping. The odds that you have one, a birth certificate, odds are that you have one, a birth certificate, on any given day, according to the US Census Bureau, which is overseen by the Department of Commerce, an estimated 10,800 babies are born in the United States, or one birth every 8 seconds. Most, if not all of them, will be issued a birth certificate. A birth certificate is a document issued by a government that records the birth of a child for vital statistics, tax, military, and census purpose. So if you're wondering how your baby gets drafted, it's through this contract right here, how they get tracked into taxes right here. So the birth certificate is among the first legal documents an individual might acquire. So when you just record something, that doesn't bind you to obligations, okay? And that's why they're stating here explicitly it is a legal document. It's not just recording something, it's a legal document, it's a contract. They are so common that we might even overlook their significance. In the United States, birth certificates serve as proof of an individual's age, citizenship status, and identity. They are necessary to obtain a social security number, which that's actually not true. You can get a social security number without a birth certificate, and I've helped families do it. Apply for a passport, not true. I get families' passports without the birth certificate and without the social. Enroll in schools, not true. Get a driver's license, not true. Gain employment, Not true, and apply for other benefits. So it's kind of interesting, I think, that they say all these things. Of course, they're first going to ask for a birth certificate, and most people just give it, but you don't need a birth certificate to do all these things, and I help families do that. But humanitarian Desmond Tutu described the birth certificate as a small paper, but it actually establishes who you are and gives access to the rights and privileges. You receive privileges that can be given and taken because you become a citizen and removing yourself from your nationality. Americans, American is nationality, and citizenship is where you're getting contracted here. And the obligations. So it's a contract that makes obligations for your baby of citizenship. So in the United States, there's no national federal birth registry as you might see in other nations, such as the United Kingdom. Instead, birth certificates are issued by the states, which are obligated under law to report annual vital statistics data to the federal government. Note that if a baby is born to American parents overseas, the U.S. Department of State collects that data. So within each state, the management of birth certificates might be further decentralized, with data collected and certificates issued at the county or municipal level. Birth data is submitted to the state, county, or municipality by parents, doctors, midwives, and hospitals, typically via paper or electronic forms. The state and federal government use this data to understand population changes, childbirth trends, maternal and fetal health and mortality, new parent demographics, and other trends that inform policymakers. So within this decentralized system, there is not a required standard birth certificate document that states must issue to individuals. The federal government does, however, offer a standard birth certificate application form, the U.S. Standard Certificate of Live Birth, which states use to collect data about the individual births. States are then free to produce their own birth certificate documents for distribution to individuals. The federal government issues guidance to the states about what information should appear on the certificates. Both the standard certificate of live birth and the guidelines about state-issued birth certificate documents are updated periodically per requirements of the Model State Vital Statistics Act of 1959. So under this framework, with one standard birth certificate application form and no standard birth certificate document, the National Center for the Health Statistics estimates that there are 14,000 different birth certificate documents circulating in the United States. They have changed the birth certificate over time because people started noticing certain things, like when it would say American banknote and different things, noticing it's obvious it's a financial instrument, but we're going to get into that later. So, yeah, anyway, they have standard certificate of live birth, which is the registration form, but the actual birth certificate is based on the state, essentially. So, yeah, this teaching legal docs will consider both in the United States standard certificate of live birth application form and a typical state-issued birth certificate documents. So they are legal documents. This documentation of birth and other vital statistics, example, birth, death, marriage, divorce, has been a long-standing tradition amongst populations for centuries, typically through individual families or their churches. The idea that a government should also record this vital information is a relatively modern development. Okay. So saying the test of time is families recording and passing down documents. That still holds true today. And it even says so here that recording, registering the birth certificate is a new thing. So I want you to know that family records, religious texts, private records are the standard actually, and birth certificates entered in. So I hate to say when I say that I help mothers and fathers with their secondary forms that replace the birth certificate, actually, the birth certificate replaced these standard forms, but these standard forms still hold true and they actually still hold more weight. They've stood the test of time. And yes, They are legally and lawfully recognized. So the United Kingdom was one of the first country to mandate the collection of birth data at the national level in 1853. The United States began collecting birth data at the national level in 1902 via the US Census. And I do want to make note too, just on the topic of the typewriter comment that I've heard at this point in 1902, when the United States just began collecting, typewriters could do lowercase at this point too. Certain individual states had already began collecting birth data, including Virginia, which began collecting data in the colony in 1632, and Massachusetts in 1639. So it became a matter of getting each state to follow suit. And as we've said earlier, that there is no standard, even today, standard birth certificate, but you will notice that it is standard, still practice to do all caps. So there would be no reason for them to keep that standard or that tradition without a reason. So the federal government is first developed a standard birth certificate application form in 1907, 5 years after the Census Bureau began collecting data, which again is overseen by the Department of Commerce. The current system of the states collecting data and reporting it to the federal government developed between 1915 and when the federal government mandated that states collect and report the data, and in 1933, by which time all the states were participating. So 1933 is a really important year, and we're going to get deeper into the significance of that later. But essentially, that's when the United States went completely bankrupt and no longer was on the gold standard, and the humans became the collateral for the national debt. So this is why 1933 was so important, that this now became a standard, because the birth certificate was what contracted them and their future labor to collateralize us, to create, yeah, anyway, we're the collateral for the national debt, and that year is very specific. So in 1946, responsibility for collecting and publishing vital statistics at the national level shifted from the Census Bureau to the National Office of Vital Statistics, which is now the National Center for Health Statistics. Today, the NCHS is part of the Centers for Disease Control, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So during World War II and the years after, employers increasingly asked for prospective employees to offer proof of their citizenship status. Federal employment laws for certain industries, such as aircraft manufacturing, already mandated that employers hire citizens, and many Americans did not have any proof of their citizenship status. Many Americans tried to get jobs at the wartime economy, expressed frustration at the seemingly bureaucratic hurdle. One Rhode Island man wrote, This is America, and it's not right to refuse me a job because I have not given my birth papers. I have a wife and child, and I want to get a job." So really it's kind of interesting that at this point they started requiring it and kind of bending people and forcing them to get the birth certificate so they could just get paid because the government wanted to get their funding. So anyway, you start realizing the way, and of course they say mandated birth certificates, but no one was asking what secondary forms it were accepted as well. So anyway, kind of moving along is kind of interesting, I thought, and I highly recommend everyone kind of finish reading. I won't read this whole thing here, but essentially, really under the Uniform Commercial Code, certificates are titles. So UCC 9-102 defines a certificate of title as proof of ownership in commerce. So by signing as the informant on the registration form, you give the state claim to the legal title of the child. Where you get to remain the biological custodian, the state actually becomes the legal owner. So with that registration, we literally, like I said earlier, handed the title to them saying, I can't handle this. I'm not competent. I need you to handle this. And this is why they call you a parent, a pair that rents that child. So the push to register your child isn't just about like record keeping, like I've said, it's about revenue. Hospitals actually receive financial incentives for registering births quickly. What's kind of interesting is they'll say 10 days, you need to register within 10 days, and ideally they'll get that registration between, those 2 days that you're in the hospital, where of course they're putting you on a time clock, right? Because they know a postpartum mother is not even on planet Earth yet. She is still in the cosmos, waiting to kind of float down like a feather back to Earth and land her feet, which is days after. They know that this window of time is the perfect time when she's mentally not here to hand her a whole bunch of legal documents that sign away her first child. It sign away all her children. Um, yeah. Anyway, so that's all by design. Of course, they get that incentive to do it quickly. That's why they're pushing you so quickly because they have a financial incentive to do so on a microscopic level. But each registered birth triggers funding from the state and federal programs. And in some cases, it even impacts the hospital's performance metrics for reimbursements. So I want to share with you really quick the Title 5. Let's see, where is it? Okay, USC. I'm going to share my screen here. Yeah. So, yeah, USC, United States Code, Title 5, which has everything to do with government organization and government employees. Okay. So, a section that has to do with government employees, if you scroll down here, you'll see that, where is it? Okay, so the minimum standards for birth certificates. So it's kind of interesting that under Title 5 for government employees is birth certificates, the birth certificate section. So yeah, you start reading under birth certificates, and yeah, it's saying each state shall certify to the Secretary of Health and Human Services that the state is in compliance with this required section at a minimum. Let's see, I'm trying to find the sections. There's so much in here. And again, I highly recommend you do this yourself and really read through every little section. I wish I had hours and hours with you. Um, but let's see, no later than 1 year after the date, a minimum shall require the certification. Oh, here we go. So the allocation of grants right here. The secretary shall award grants to states under this paragraph based on the proportion that the estimated average annual number of birth certificates issued by the state applying for a grant bears to the estimated average annual number of birth certificates issued by all states. So minimum allocation, notwithstanding subparagraph B, each state shall receive not less than 0.5% of the grant funds made available under this paragraph. So yeah, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, in coordination with the Commissioner of Social Security and other appropriate federal agencies, shall award grants to states under criteria established by the Secretary to assist states in computerizing, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so yeah, they're allocating grants under this paragraph of the proportion estimated annual average number of births and deaths created by the state applying for a grant bears to the estimated annual average minimum allocation, 0.5% of the grant funds available, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, like I said, go read through this, read through it with intention, but the big picture in all of this is that the states get funding. So the reason that they want you registered right away is because that moment is when they get funding. Every state gets funding for every baby that's born. So again, how do they get funding is your baby is now the collateral and their future labor is what backs that funding. That's why money can be made because they know that baby now is going to be in the system. So yeah. So who ensures that this process happens is the licensed medical professionals do. So the moment that they accept and operate under a state issued license, they actually now become agents of the state. So this is why hospitals and licensed midwives insist that registration is required. It is because for them, it is required for them to keep their license. But for you, a living, breathing being, it is not. The license is the contract. That's what binds them to follow the state policy, including securing the state's legal claim over your newborn. So every registered birth is definitely more than paperwork, right? They're securing funding and they've tricked us into hiring licensed providers. They've tricked us into believing that birth is even a medical event. They've tricked us into inviting the state into our birth. So not only do a lot of people go to the state and have their baby within the state's environment, a lot of women are saying, no, I want to stay home. I don't want to have my baby within the system because they know the medical system is, ugh, yeah, anyway, is corrupt. But they unknowingly invite the state into their birth in their private home by the way of a licensed midwife. So they're sneaky inviting agents of the state into our birth. So that's why these licensed providers are required to register the baby. You are not. And there is other ways you can do that by, yeah, not inviting licensed providers to your birth. I'll keep that there. But yeah, I go into what to do instead as far as non-licensed providers and other options and continuing education that I share. But yeah, anyway, we'll move on. So when you register the birth, they're not just recording the event. Like I said, they are signing a contract that creates a legal entity, a trust or an estate in your child's name, like we said, this person. The state as trustee holds the legal title, and you as the biological parent hold the equitable interest. So your baby's legal person then becomes the beneficiary subject to state's rules. So after the social security number and after registration, there is now an account number for that trust. So in commercial terms, it functions like an employee identification number, tying your baby's legal person to the federal corporation called the United States. So I want to share with you really quick what an old social security card looked like back in the 30s. You can see that it literally says account number. It shared the account number and right here, employee signature, because you literally are an employee to the corporation. That's what you're identifying as living in District of Columbia and working as an employee to District of Columbia, which is why you are a Title V government employee and they're registering you that way. So anyway, so when we get into like kind of the social security stuff, you start realizing that the Social Security is an insurance trust fund. I didn't realize it was a trust fund. So now that they've got their property as an asset within their trust, now they want to insure that property. So that's why they have all of us insured. And if you don't believe that it's a trust fund, you can look it up, the Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, funded by payroll taxes. You get to see who the Board of Trustees are. They are listed right here. Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Health and Human Services, and Commissioner of Social Security. So, not a conspiracy that they are getting funding for your baby and that they're insuring the property and it is an insurance trust fund. So that's why I talk to mothers and fathers, if you go deeper into my work, that we get private insurance and do it without the middleman. You can get private insurance that allows you to do private banking without using their insurance funds. So, anyway. So, yeah, from the moment forward, the state can act as an employer, regulator, and creditor, and your baby in law is just an asset to the trust. So, yeah, anyway, so at birth, they don't just take your child's name, they also take the soul. When I said soul, you don't know if I'm saying soul, S-O-L-E, or S-O-U-L. And so I want you to know that it's symbolic. When they take the footprint, the sole of the foot, that pressed ink onto the hospital form, in law, the physical imprint serves as biometric evidence, just like a fingerprint does. It is the original mark attached to the contract that begins your baby's commercial life, but also simultaneously, they are taking the soul Really, what they want is to get the sole of that foot on paper before the sole of the foot can land on the land which they are supposed to inherit. They are stealing the soul, the essence. So, next, I want to talk about the placenta, which is essentially the baby's first property. And I like to point out that it is your baby's placenta. It is not yours, it's your baby's. But from the moment of birth, your baby arrives with that piece of their first property, which is the placenta. And it quite literally is the baby's DNA twin. They share DNA. So in law, the placenta is considered part of the baby's body until it naturally separates. And that is a lotus birth when you do wait until the placenta, umbilical cord, and baby naturally separate. That baby, it naturally does detach, but they've tricked us into this disconnection ritual, which is it is a black magic ritual, and we can go deep into that. I go into that in my lotus birth ebook that I offer on my website if you really want to go into the black magic rituals of the placenta and all that. But yeah, yet in hospitals, it's taken and treated as medical waste when we know it's a spiritual and physical thing, of course, but they take it without your informed consent. So in reality, it is a valuable source of stem cells, hormones, and DNA, and by taking it, they seize ownership of that biological asset that can be sold and patented. So you didn't sell it though, but they got you to donate it. That's how they say it's for medical research. Yeah, anyway, so the placenta, it's so much more. Ugh, if you can't tell, I'm like so passionate about the placenta and all it does. And I wish I had hours to go into this with you as well. But the placenta is more than an organ, it is a record of your baby's DNA, literally. Their lifeline in the womb. And in some traditions, it's part of the child's soul body connection. But in law, possession is 9/10 ownership. So when the hospital takes the placenta, they take something that they can treat as property. And what's really interesting is if you look back at archived vital statistics reports from the 1940s, you'll see something kind of strange. In some cases, they had afterbirth listed in the category as stillbirth, recorded as something delivered but not living. And in commercial law, non-living property can be owned, registered, and managed in a way that a living woman and man cannot. So I'm going to pose a theory. As the placenta is the literal DNA twin of the baby, just think of this. What if the afterbirth is actually the one being recorded as the legal person that they legally own in their registries? It's food for thought. Now, do I know this for sure? No, I don't. Um, I don't know that the placenta creates the all caps name. That's certainly just a theory, and I want to be clear about that. But what I do know for sure is that when you do donate your placenta, the state owns that DNA and they make a lot of money off your baby's blood and stem cells, and they make a whole bunch of money off selling your baby's DNA. I'm going to show you a quick video really quick that really kind of highlights that this part isn't a theory that they're selling your baby's DNA. They own your baby's DNA, they're selling it, they're making money on it. This is a clip from The Bachelor in Paradise, I want to say. What do you do for work?
I work in medical sales.
Medical
So I sell
sales?
stem cells.
Where do you get them from?
I sell placentas and umbilical cords.
Oh,
Yeah.
you sell placentas and umbilical cords?
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Oh
my God, Dad.
Yeah, it's not me. It sounds weird when I say it, but like it helps a ton of people. It's actually a really good product.
So like, how much for one?
Huh. I don't even want to tell you. So technically, you're not allowed to sell your own placenta.
Like if I wanted to buy one.
Like a whole placenta or gold course, probably like 40, 45 grand.
What?
It's crazy.
Oh my God. I'm like really uncomfortable about knowing this. This information is too much for me. Yeah. So one more quick video to share with you.
So there are companies that come in to take women's placentas and use them for pharmaceuticals, for beauty products, for stem cells, basically medical procedures. They're valued at a lot of money. I've heard $50,000. I've heard $500,000. I've
That
heard
much for a placenta.
for a placenta. I've also heard that they're more valuable when they're a C-section
Why?
because they don't go through the vaginal canal. So they're not as, quote, contaminated. So they can charge more for it.
So you mean to tell me that a company will pay 50,000 or above
Mhm.
for a woman's placenta
Mhm.
and pay more if they are not given birth vaginally? And is that why so many women are being forced into C-sections?
So, yeah, food for thought on, what isn't a conspiracy is that they are making a lot of money off your baby's placenta. And obviously, that's why I'm really passionate about lotus births. I share about lotus births, I teach about lotus births. I have my own lotus birth kits that I share. That's a whole other thing. That's the is instilling the imprint in sovereignty. But I also want to move on to, talking about the heel prick, which is putting DNA within their system as well. So really within hours, we all know that most hospitals perform the newborn screening test, which is the heel prick, where they take blood from the sole of the foot for genetic testing. So, we're all just told that it's for our baby's health and what you're not told is that in many of the states, the DNA is actually stored and owned indefinitely. So often in government or private biobank databases. So those blood spots are linked to your child's legal person, the all caps entity. By tying the DNA to the legal name, they do claim property interest in your child's genes, their literal DNA. And as with any property in commerce, the owner is the one that gets to control its use. So I want to share with you one more video really quick.
A heel prick. Nearly every baby born in the U.S. gets one shortly after birth. The newborn blood fills 6 spots on a special card used to test the baby for dozens of disorders that, if treated early enough, could prevent severe disabilities, even death. But unless your child is diagnosed with a disorder, it's often lost in the fog of childbirth. Genetic testing? We randomly selected 6 new moms and asked about their baby's genetic test. 3 remember the heel prick, 3 think they knew about the test, but like most parents, none knew what happened after the test. Were you aware that the state was storing your child's DNA? No. Do you think you should have been aware? Absolutely. You see, for the baby's own potentially life-saving test, researchers generally only need a few spots. The remaining blood becomes property of the state and may be sold to outside researchers without your knowledge or consent.
Blood is inherently or intrinsically personally identifiable.
Now, some states destroy the blood spots after a year. 12 states store them for at least 21. But California is one of 4 states that stores them indefinitely in a state-run biobank.
Just didn't realize that there's a repository somewhere of every baby born in the state. It's like fingerprints.
Companies aren't very good at keeping data safe. They try. There just should be accountability and transparency.
While parents don't have the right to opt out before storage, they can ask the agency to destroy the sample after the fact, though the agency says it may not be able to comply.
These samples are needed to create the new testing technology.
Fred Laurie, former director of the Genetic Disease Screening Program, says the samples are invaluable to researchers and primarily used to identify new diseases, ultimately saving more babies. California has been storing blood spots since 1983, collecting more than 9.5 million since 2000 alone, and can now test newborns for more than 80 different disorders.
So you take issue with the fact that we say the state is selling your child's blood spots to private researchers.
With the term selling.
Explains regulations require the program to be self-supporting.
Supposed to collect enough money to pay for itself.
The biobank collects $20 to $40 per blood spot, which Lori says helps to recoup costs. They've sold about 16,000 spots over the past 5 years, totaling around $700,000. In comparison, the program reports $128 million in revenue last year alone, mostly from testing fees paid by parents. They used to collect 5 samples from each child. They now collect 6. And while the state may not profit off the child's DNA, what about the researchers?
Do any of those studies result in something that the company could make money from?
Theoretically, yes.
So, yeah. Anyway, they do own your baby's DNA. That does become property of the state. Most mothers and fathers don't know that that's something they're handing over. And if that's a surprise, they'll be really surprised when they find out what the birth certificate does. Yeah, anyway, it's just one of those things where it's like so crazy. You start realizing how much money can be made your from your blood, your placenta, your baby, your future labor. How they're making money. It's wild. So anyway, I want to talk about Parens Patriae, which is Latin for parents of the nation. I want to pull that up for you as well. And again, you guys should all be doing this yourself as well as you're doing your own research. So Parens Patriae means it's Latin for parent of the country or homeland. So under Parens Patriae, a state or court has a paternal and protective role over its citizens or other subjects to its jurisdiction. The doctrine of Parens Patriae is a doctrine under which a state has third party standing to bring a lawsuit on behalf of a citizen when the suit implicates a state's quasi-sovereign interests for the well-being of its citizens. The Parens Patriae doctrine is also the doctrine in which all orphans, dependent children, and persons deemed incompetent are within the special protection and under the control of the state. So really what we're doing here is they're invoking the Parens Patriae, becoming the father of the nation, the parent of the country is what that means. And we're deeming ourselves incompetent and abandoning our property when we hand the title over to the state. So yeah, just we know that this is the doctrine that allows the state to step in as the guardian for those it deems unable to care for themselves. And yeah, we're all essentially claiming ourselves as incompetent. We're all considered orphans, not by using the married name on the birth certificate. I don't know if you guys noticed when you're signing the certificate of live birth, it specifically asks for the mother's maiden name. Like I said, that's on purpose because what makes an illegitimate child, which then allows them to have the father, the state become the father. So yeah, they don't use the married name because the married name is what ties to the father's family estate. So the record portrays that the child is having no legal father in commerce. It doesn't matter if the father is listed when you're using the mother's maiden name. Of course, it's all legal trickery that they're doing. It's all on purpose. So effectively, basically, that makes the baby a ward of the state or a foundling within the state and being able to step in under Parens Patriae. So in case law, Prince versus Massachusetts in the Supreme Court, it said the state has a wide range of power for limiting parental freedom and authority in things affecting the child's welfare under the doctrine and Parens Patriae. So once you register the child, you accept this jurisdiction. This is why the state can override your medical, education, or custodial decisions because the child is legally considered their property. And if they don't like how you're handling their property, they can override you at any time they deem necessary. So this is why they can call in an alphabet agency to come take your baby because essentially in their eyes, under their jurisdiction, they're the rightful owners of that property. So, when parents say, I don't co-parent with the government, well, you actually do if you choose to sign a birth certificate. So, yeah, with the concept that baby is property and we're handing the title over to the state, essentially abandoning our property to hand to them. Do you think that it's a coincidence that the same building where you can legally abandon a baby, okay, a hospital is where people can legally take their babies and abandon them, and they are foundling hospitals essentially where they take the baby in, become the parent of the baby, the state becomes the parent. Is it a coincidence? The same building where you can legally abandon a baby is also where 99% of birth registration happens. Do you think it's a coincidence that that building is designated for abandoned babies? Just throwing that out there. So, yeah, anyway, talking about the 14th Amendment, I want to like briefly like sprinkle this in here. We're going to get talking about it later in another episode, but really essentially after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment created a new class of citizenship, which was the United States citizen. And before this, you were a state national under the state's common law. The 14th Amendment citizen is a federal citizen and a ward of the federal jurisdiction. So essentially, when you're registering your child's birth, you contract them into the 14th Amendment status from day one, making them subject to federal authority, not just the protections of your state. So you'll realize how many times the 14th Amendment gets brought up for this specific reason. So I mean, really, the greatest lie they ever told you was that you needed their permission to be a mother or father. It's kind of funny that we think that it's not legitimate if we don't have them tell us it's legitimate. We don't need their permission to be a mother or father because the truth is they need yours. So the moment you stop giving it, the spell is broken. Okay. So in the next episode, we're going to go deeper and we're going to go into the two Americas, the two United States, the one on paper and the one that you think you live in.